Before I bring the message today entitled Sarah, a Conflicted Woman, let me just teach for just a few minutes. And this is something that I wanted to do last week, but it didn't quite work out. So I am going to just give you some background information. Can you turn these lights off just for a moment for me? Remember we said that Abraham was from Ur of the Chaldees. And I couldn't make my spotter work before. I went and bought a new one. Aren't you proud of me? And Ur of the Chaldees, remember this is a center of moon worship. And this river here is called the Euphrates. This is the Tigris River. They merge very close to Ur of the Chaldees, and then those two rivers flow into what we call the Persian Gulf. And just another little bit of information. Today, Iran and Iraq are very much in the news. This is the geographical area today known as Iran. Here is Iraq. I have a couple of these kinds of slides that I want to share with you. This one has a little more detail. Remember, here is the Euphrates River, here is the Tigris, and here is Ur of the Chaldees. Follow the red line that goes all the way up to Haran. Haran is very much a part of our biblical story. And in the sermon today, and I'll just repeat it, this geographical area from Ur to Haran was 650 miles. From Haran down to the area that we call Canaan is 350 miles. So we're talking at a minimum of 1,000 miles in that journey. This one, the map is a little noisier. Again, let me start with Ur of the Chaldees. We have a blue line that reveals the pilgrimage of Abraham and Sarah and their family. At Haran, we come down just north of Damascus, down through Canaan, and eventually they end up in Egypt. If you remember, those of you who were here last week, they end up in Egypt. This one is really busy. I'm going to skip that one. This is a map that I would like to have you etch it into your mind. One of the reasons being, and I can't really reveal very much about this truth, but here is Abraham. And remember, God calls him out of Ur of the Chaldees. He is obedient. He responds to both the instruction and the message of God. Now, let's drop down to the next generation. Today, you will hear about Ishmael. And I will try to explain that. And in a couple of weeks, I will deal with Isaac, even though Isaac is mentioned in the message today. Now, this is very important for us. Following Ishmael, the Arabs today that we have knowledge of, and there are many nations of Arabs, there is a stream of Arabs that come from Ishmael. But remember, Isaac has twin sons. One of those sons is Jacob. I will speak on Jacob, and I'm wrestling with whether I want to speak on Esau. It may be that I will. When we follow Esau down, also Arab nations also came from Esau. So Arabs today come from the lineage of Esau and also from Ishmael. Does that make sense to you as I sort of give that simple outline on where the Arabs come? I'll mention it now just to give emphasis. In the message, I'll mention it again. Not only did Sarah create unbelievable difficulty by the decision that she made, we are still living out today the results of that decision. We have tremendous conflict today with many of the Islamic faith people. And all of that is traced back to this historical division. I want you to see that the present newspaper reports that we have every day of the week ties back to the biblical record, and there is that connection. Just a couple of slides. Abraham and Sarah. Here's Sarah and Isaac. Sarah and Abraham again. And now I'm going to start the sermon, okay? Well, have you ever been conflicted? Sure you have. We've all been conflicted. Let me give you a couple of ideas about this clash of ideas that takes place in our minds. And we feel conflicted sometimes when we have to make difficult decisions. Let me give you a few illustrations. I've been going through this, made a decision, not so much conflicted now. I have some emotions to deal with. Should I retire or should I continue to work? That's a conflicted kind of statement. Should I buy a starter home or should I continue to rent an apartment? I'm having trouble making a mind, not me personally. Should I continue to attend my small church or should I look for a mega church? Should I trade cars or should I drive my present automobile another year? Should I struggle to pay my past due bills or claim bankruptcy? Should I continue to date my boyfriend or end the negative and dysfunctional relationship? I vote for cut it off. Should I leave home and live on my own or wait a few more years before I claim independence? Should I surrender my life to Christ or continue the path of humanism and live life for myself? Should I go to the emergency room or try to self-medicate myself and stay home? Well, this is no big deal, I suppose. Should we eat out at home tonight or go to a restaurant? That's my question to Ruth. I get different responses depending on the day. Should I get marriage counseling or should I file for divorce? Well, you could easily add to that list. You all have your own conflicting issues to deal with. Well, Sarah was a conflicted woman. And there are points where we can identify with Sarah because we too have temptations that we give into. And we too make poor decisions. And we too give into temptations. We too panic. And so there are 4 points that I want to make in the morning message. And Sarah was capable of taking things into her own hands. Remember the promise that came to Abraham? Well, that promise also came to Sarah. Sarah was a childless woman, but was very beautiful. Ruthie asked me after the service last Sunday if I was going to dress up like Sarah today. And I said, "Are you kidding?" And then she laughed. The scripture is very clear on those 2 realities in her life. She was childless. She was beautiful. But Sarah was frustrated and depressed that she did not have a child. That was a heavy burden for her. Every night and day, her childlessness weighed on her. She hated, absolutely hated, being called barren. Say that word out loud with me. Barren. It was a cruel label, but it was her identification. Most of her Israelite female friends had children. And she would listen to their parenting stories. She would smile as she listened to her friends describe their children, but inside, she was not smiling. Inside, there was indescribable pain. She had no children to hold, no children to breastfeed, no children to make clothes for, no children to listen to, no children to dress, no children to put to bed every evening. She had no child to read to, no child to sing to. She had no child to teach and discipline. In essence, Sarah had no child to love. She had no child to receive hugs and kisses from. She had no child to say, "Good night, Mother. I love you, Mother." Sarah, as you know, was the wife of the great patriarch Abraham. They were well known. Sarah felt the daily burden that she did not provide her husband a son to inherit their wealth and carry on the legacy of their family. People knew them as the childless couple. She hated social events. She could just imagine the women saying, "Oh, there's Sarah. She's barren." And so she was tortured by her childlessness. It ate at her. Sometimes we find it hard to accept circumstances, and we take things into our own hands. I certainly have been guilty of that, of not waiting on God, taking things into my own hands in order to make something happen that I think should be made to happen. But people sometimes get tired of waiting for God to help. And Sarah was tired of her frustration. Her depression was debilitating. Her patience was exhausted. She was tired of waiting. And you know, when you're frustrated, when you're depressed, when you are resentful, sometimes you and I can become desperate. Maybe there's some flashback in your own mind in which you were desperate for something to happen. You took things into your own hands rather than waiting for God to act. Sarah, like many of the Jewish women, had a maid. And when they were in Egypt, Sarah bought an Egyptian woman to be her maid. She owned Hagar. She took Hagar with their family when they left Egypt and stayed in the Negev and then worked their way up to Canaan. And then Sarah had this brainstorm of an idea. And she acted poorly. And probably most of us can look back on our lives and see where we have acted poorly. So Sarah approached her husband about having sexual relationships with her handmaiden. She owned Hagar, and Hagar was beholden to her. And Abram agreed to the terrible plan and went to bed with Hagar. When Hagar discovered that she was pregnant, Sarah became very combative to her slave woman. Their relationship was no longer the same. It radically changed. The second point I want to make is that Sarah could act out her negative feelings in destructive ways. Well, we all have some negative feelings. You don't need to debate that issue. I don't need to debate that issue with you. What do we do with our negative feelings? And often we act those negative feelings out, and they get us in trouble. Yes, Sarah had a negative side. She could throw fits and tantrums. She knew how to be manipulative. She even knew how to get mean. You normally don't think about that dimension of Sarah, do you? And we see these feelings acted out against Hagar. Sarah could be impatient, temperamental, conniving, cantankerous, cruel, flighty, pouty, jealous, erratic, unreasonable, and be a nag. By no means was she always the perfect model of godly grace and meekness. We have discovered that we too can be two kinds of people. We want to keep the good side up, don't we? We want to gloss over the negative side. Sarah had both, just like us. The more we learn about Sarah, the more questions come to our mind. Was she a pampered beauty? You may not like what I'm going to say. You'll get over it. The name given to her at birth, Sarai. Teddy, do you know what your wife's name means? You'd better. Means my princess. How sweet. How cute. How warm. How fuzzy. Sarah, my princess. Her name was not changed to Sarah until she was 99 years old. She was stunningly attractive. The Bible is so clear on that. Everywhere she went, she was instantly received with favor and privilege. That kind of reaction can spoil the best of women. Oh, you didn't hear that. That kind of response can spoil the best of women. Sarah was remembered for her legendary beauty. Now let me say that physical attractiveness can get you into trouble. I've never had that problem. I have never had that problem. Switch the word beauty to handsome. Never had that problem. But it's true today. How many of you know beautiful women, but they're very shallow on the inside? Now, all beautiful women are not shallow, but some beautiful women can be shallow on the inside. They are beautiful women, but they want to be in charge, and they take issues into their own hands. They become control freaks. They are immoral, irresponsible, unpredictable, manipulative, and insensitive because they rely on their physical beauty to get them through life. They live out a Hollywood lifestyle. I don't need to be sensitive, I don't need to be respectful, and I do not need to be kind. I am beautiful. I don't need to live by social customs. Some beautiful women are convinced that they do not need to live by the rules. I am beautiful, and this reality gives me the option of doing what I want to do. I do not want to conform to anybody or anything. I am a privileged person, and I can write my own agenda. Step aside, step aside. Step aside, Miss Beautiful is walking through. We see beautiful women filled with pride and arrogance. Sarah had an idea on how to get a child for Abraham and therefore have a future family. Here again is the plan. She would ask Abraham to take her handmaiden to be his concubine. Now, do you know what a concubine is? A concubine is a wife without full privileges. That's who a concubine is. A wife, but without full privileges. Well, after Hagar became pregnant, Sarah's feelings toward her became sour and destructive. Hagar began to despise her mistress. Sarah was not anticipating that. The relationship changed drastically. Sarah complained to Abraham, now look at this. This is human life. It was Sarah's plan to have her husband go to bed with her mistress so that her mistress could be a surrogate woman, produce a child that would become her child, and therefore Abraham would have seed for their family. Now, after it happens, watch this. Sarah comes to Abraham, and what does she do? She blames her husband for the problem. It was her plan, but blames her husband. How many of you have done that to your wife? How many times have you done that to your husband? How many times have you done that to your pastor? Here's an idea. The idea is carried out. It went sour. It went south. It's your problem. How are you going to fix it? And Abraham is there scratching his head. I thought you were the one who asked me to do this. How many of you have made a decision, and after you made the decision, you didn't like what you thought you liked? Probably all of you. I certainly have. I have purchased antique furniture. I thought I wanted it. After I bought it, I took it home and discovered I didn't want the thing. Ruthie says, well, it's too late now. Thanks a lot, honey. Thanks a lot. Abraham, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now she knows she's pregnant. She despises me. Abraham feels caught in the middle. He doesn't say something like this. Well, Sarah, let's have a meeting tonight between you and Hagar, and let's talk this thing out. No way was he going to take on the role of a counselor. No way. Do you know what he says? He says what I would have said. You do what you need to do. Do you know what she did? Sure you do. She kicked Sarah out of the house. You know, people can be very caustic in their speech. They can communicate hostile, nonverbal behavior. Sarah mistreated Hagar, and she ran away. She had enough of bad treatment. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And the angel said, Hagar, servant of Sarah, remember the angel identifies her, so that Hagar knows that this communicator, this angel, knows a great deal about what has taken place prior to this moment. Where are you going, and where are you from? And Hagar knew the angel knew about her. I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah. And the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now with child, and you will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility toward all of his brothers. Wow. What a statement. Hagar said, you are the one who sees me. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. All I can say is, Abram, you're quite a man. Abram, you're quite a man. Sarah aborted the promise of God to Abraham and Sarah. And Sarah took things into her own hands, and the plan tore her apart, leaving a lasting scar on her personality. You know, her bitterness continued for 13 years. And she finally insisted that Abraham throw Hagar and her son out of the house. So we have two pitchings here. One driven, the other one a command. She's got to leave. Now let me tell you the story. I'll repeat it again, but at this point, Ishmael was 13 years old. I'll come back and pick this up. But Sarah now has little Isaac. It is at the big festival of weaning. Now, we don't throw a party today when we wean our kids. We feed them Similac, and we just keep going. But when you breastfeed a child, there comes a point where you wean them off of a mother's milk. When that happens, that's a big celebration. Ruth never did that. I missed a party. And at that party, here is this 13-year-old Ishmael taunting his little half-brother, who is probably early toddler age, maybe 2 years of age. And guess who hears the taunt? Mother. I find this in marriage counseling, in family counseling, where you may have, for one reason or another, either a death in the family or a single person marrying someone who had been married before, or a divorce in both sides, and both bring children into the marriage. I tell you, you have to walk tippy-toe around that, because mother says, you can discipline your own kids, but don't you discipline mine. Or dad says, you can discipline your own kids, but don't you discipline mine. And I'll tell you, that's a fragile kind of relationships, and sparks fly quickly. Sarah demanded that Hagar and her son leave. Well, that's enough of the one side of Sarah. Let's go to the more beautiful side of Sarah. Sarah had a positive side to her personality, and she had so many important strengths in her life. She was faithful to her husband, Abraham. Whatever Abraham basically said, she was willing to follow. willing to do. The negative side of Sarah was not the predominant photograph. I want you to think in terms of, and we didn't read it, Hebrews 11:11 places Sarah in the hallway of faith. You can read that for yourself. Hebrews 11:11. Sarah is placed in the hallway of faith. Says something about who she really was. We have to be careful not to be that hard on Sarah, because you have these promises and they are not fulfilled, and time keeps moving on, and we have not heard from God. God has not acted. She came to the conclusion, maybe God doesn't want me to have children. And you forget momentarily, at least, about the promise that God has made to us or you. When God called Abraham to leave Ur, Sarah was so devoted to her husband. She went eagerly and enthusiastically. She was physically strong. She walked, made meals, and helped to take care of the livestock. She was agile and healthy and vigorous. In this regard, Sarah was absolutely amazing. Amazing. May I just confess, since Ruthie isn't here. Ruthie does not like to move. However, she followed me to Auburn, Indiana, to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, back to Huntington, Indiana, then to Morristown, Pennsylvania, and then back to Huntington again. I want to move to a one-story house. Ruth says the undertaker will have to move her out of her house. She is not moving. I have to give up on that idea. I am stuck in Arlington Heights until the funeral director carries me out. Now just use your imagination. Use your imagination. Think of Sarah having to pack up the tents and personal belongings and go a day's journey and then set up tents again. Ruthie, are you listening back there to me? The next day she would have the same ritual, and the day following until they reached their destination. I am repeating myself, but it's good for positive reinforcement. It was 650 miles from Ur to Haran. And it was approximately 350 miles from Haran to Cana. We're talking about a 1,000-mile trip, walking 8 to 10 miles a day with all of your belongings. Do you think Sarah ever muttered under her breath? Do you think she ever complained to the animals? However, she wanted to give birth to a child, and she would try to make that happen. She would stay faithful to the hard assignment. Now, if you divide 8 into 1,000, you're over 100 moves. Ruthie, over 100 moves. And you don't want to move. Sarah's life was characterized by humility and meekness and hospitality and faithfulness. All of us know people who are rude, cruel, mean, sarcastic, or what we call love bank withdrawal people. But Sarah had a positive and faithful side to her life. Yes, Sarah's faith at times grew weak. Her own heart led her astray. If we don't know the other side of Sarah, we would be tempted to picture her as a battle axe. A harsh, severe woman, relentlessly self-centered. She is inconsistent. People who knew her, including Abraham, might be tempted to say, would the real Sarah please stand up? I told you about the taunting story. Let me go to the end here. Sarah still maintained faith. Still some hope. And I want to close the message. Nothing is impossible with God. You know, one of the reasons why I think that God had Abraham and Sarah wait so long? Let me give you my theory. I think it's pretty strong. Sarah is in her 80s, way beyond post-menopausal time in her life. You don't have children after childbearing age. I think God waited because one of the circumstances in which the only way you can explain it is to say, God did it. Often in life, there are periods of waiting. When it happens, we must come to the conclusion. It's not by what we have done. It is what God has done. That came to me in a forceful way this week. I have to tell you this story. I'm kind of excited about it. To repeat, this building and the whole family life complex with equipment cost us right at $970,000. Most churches take 20 to 30 years to pay off a mortgage. We are in year 10, and I had another, in the last 2 weeks, $8,000 come in for the building that I had no knowledge of. It is something that God does. And I tell you, we as a congregation ought to praise God that He is going to pay for this building in 10 years. It's a God thing. It's not what man has done. It is a God thing. And it's like Sarah being in years, beyond bearing child, and then she becomes pregnant. It is of God. May we today realize nothing is impossible with God. I often give up too soon. You probably don't. But I often give up too soon. I need a message like this to bring me back to realize who my God is, how powerful He is, that His plan is the ultimate plan, and that we need to trust Him. And so the bottom line for this message today is, may God enrich each of us, again, like last Sunday, our faith, and to realize that nothing is impossible for God to do. Amen? Amen. Amen. Worship team, thank you for coming. Sing.